The aim of this book is that we as Christians should be better prepared for ministry in the 21st century. Some knowledge of history is essential if we're to understand our world and communicate the gospel in a relevant way. I look back at this section, at the world's history in light of the Great Commission, which I believe is actually the key to history. This is a philosophy of history that could well be seen as looking at the world through rose-tinted glasses, to use Mark Twain's quote. Yet I believe passionately that history is his story of redemptive acts in human affairs. God is in control, and Jesus reigns today. Here are a few choice quotes of what others have said about history. History seems to be merely a catalog of suffering, greed, lust for power, cruelty, and bloodshed, in which humankind stumbles from one tragedy to another. Yet there's another level of history centered on God's kingdom. It addresses rather the heroic faith and exploits of the often hated, the despised, and persecuted body of people who have met with God through faith in Jesus Christ and obeyed his last command. They have decisively influenced our world for good in every realm of human life. So in your textbook, you see how these two sides unfold. On the one hand, we see politics and war and movements of people. And on the other side, we see this spiritual reality, and we see growth and decline related to the kingdom of God and its presence in this world. The aim of our textbook is that we as Christians should be better prepared for ministry in the 21st century. And as we said, some knowledge of history, therefore, is essential. As we look at the first century, the first 100 years of Christian history, we get a sense then of God's activity in our world. So when we look at the major empires in the first century and think about some of the significant dates during that time, we see that in 06, Rome took direct control of Judea and Samaria. This was a major factor facilitating the later spread of Christianity. In 25, the foundation of the later Han Dynasty in China was established, and China was the most advanced civilization and foremost industrial empire, really, until Europe began to exploit her inventions in the 16th century. And the Silk Routes were functioning effectively for the first time during that era. In 43, the Romans began conquest of Britain. In 48, the Chinese drove out the Huns, who for 3 centuries had raided and occupied parts of northern China. And then they built the Great Wall. And in 50, the kingdom of the Goths was founded on the river of Vistula and Crimea. And the Eastern Goths and Western Goths were viewed as barbarians, really, who later contributed actually to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In 53, the first war between the Romans and the Persians, ending in 58, actually with a compromise over Armenia. Then in 58, Nero became the emperor of Rome, and he was very harsh towards the Jews and the Christians. And in 66, there was the Jewish revolt, which was crushed by Vespasian and his son Titus. And then Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed in AD 70. And at that time, nearly 600,000 people died, and 90,000 were enslaved. This led to the largest Jewish diaspora, which was a launching pad for evangelism within the Roman Empire. And in 69, Vespasian became the emperor of Rome, and then Titus succeeded him. The coming of Christ then was in a unique time when many strands converged. If we look at Galatians 4:4, it says that he came in the fullness of time. And one of these was the first globalization. There are many parallels to our situation today, and in the fourth and most really comprehensive globalization period in history. Every previous globalization has provided open trade routes, relative peace, transfer of ideas that has given really a fresh impetus to world evangelization. So should we not expect then that this time too would give us a new day for the gospel to spread forth in the 21st century? As we look at these four major globalizations in history, we can see clearly the hand of God at work. It is a world prepared really by looking at 100 BC to 200 AD. We see the Silk Routes, we see the decline of the empires of Rome and China. We see Greek language emerging. We see trade, we see religious freedoms present during that time. And we see similar things happening as we look at the other eras of globalization in history. And so the coming of Jesus was really at a unique time. And as we see those parallels and look to the modern era, I wonder if there is a great opportunity for us here today. When we look ahead and look at the book of Acts and we see the apostles and their work and their ministry, we see that their travel took them really all over the Middle East, and we see that the church was able to spread from Jerusalem to Rome, and we see a lot of influence there. So the Acts of the Apostles records only a few of the apostles' ministries, and most of the apostles' widespread ministries are known to us through Christian tradition and records that were actually written generations later. And some of the dates and stories are open to challenge and revision, but the essential historicity of their ministries, as shown in the map above, those that follow, is certain. Have we a passion, really, for the evangelization of the world as they did? So when we look at the history here, we see that, of course, Christ was the first missionary born around the turn of the millennium. We see in 26 that he was baptized and began his 3.5-year ministry, and then a few years later crucified. And as he's crucified, he sends out as he leaves this world, he sends out his disciples and the apostles to the ends of the world. And then we see around 31 the conversion of Paul to become the apostle to the Gentiles. And his ministry really began what was the internationalization of the church. And around 36 then, Philip, we can see him winning Samaritans to Christ, and the first non-Jewish congregations are started, and some of the first Christians emerging actually in Africa, in Ethiopia, which is the homeland of the Ethiopian eunuch. And in 38, Peter is preaching to the Romans, and Cornelius was converted, and he became the first of really a multitude of Roman citizens who embraced Christianity over the next several centuries. And then in 39 we see that the church in Antioch was founded as a multicultural congregation, and it became really the base for the initial waves of missionary efforts and advances into Gentile territory. And in 42 we see the first Christians in Britain, where the king of Searles, or the present-day South Wales, was converted, and he was possibly the first ruler in the world to become a Christian. So we see that the work of the apostles was significant, and that they that the gospel spread rather rapidly during that first 100 years. As we move towards the ministry of Paul and Peter, we see that Peter and many of the other apostles actually left Jerusalem after Pentecost and began their work in other regions of the world. We see Paul on his missionary journeys, and we see that Christianity soon became more centered around the Gentiles even than the Jews. We see the gospel moving out into Persia and the birth of the Assyrian church. In 49, we have the first council in Jerusalem, and the Gentile converts are released really from having to follow the Jewish law. And in 50, Paul's second missionary journey, taking him to Galatia. And in 52, history tells us that Thomas likely traveled to India, where he was martyred around AD 72. Around 53, we see Paul embarking on his third missionary journey and heading into Macedonia. And in 58, he's arrested in Jerusalem. Around 60, we see that the gospel is taken to an Arabic speaking area between the Roman and Persian empires, and we see that the gospel finds an inroad there. And it was the first independent state to become a Christian. Again, in around 64, persecution under Nero begins to heighten. Both Paul and Peter are martyred. Around 65, the Gospel of Mark is written, then followed by the other Gospels. And we see further persecution towards the end of the first century, and the book of Revelation is written. So we can see here some examples of areas where it's hypothesized that some of the other apostles may have ministered. We see here additional areas where John and Philip and Andrew might have been engaged in ministry. We also see where some of the remaining early church leaders might have been engaged in ministry. And we can see really that their ministry took them all around the Middle East and extended really as far as India, if we see Thomas ministering out there, and we even see ministry into Europe. So we see quite clearly that the early church took Christ's commission to go into all the world quite seriously. The apostles did that. They carried the message forth, and we see that the gospel spread rather rapidly during that first century. So when we think about the growth of the church, it's important to think about the 5 ministry gifts that are mentioned in Ephesians chapter 4. And in that passage, we see the apostles, prophets, evangelists, and pastors and teachers mentioned. So why did the 5 Christ-given ministries essential for the development of a mature church then essentially die out or become distorted so quickly? Did the early Christians lose the apostolic vision for world evangelization and replace it then with some other kind of church politics? The apostolic succession of 2 Timothy 2, chapter 2, verses 2 to empower a new generation of leaders rapidly degenerated into a striving for position and the development of rituals to build an enduring hierarchy. So these 5 ministries should be seen as a sequence of developing ministries as the churches grow, rather than really as a pyramid of power. So the church is beginning with the apostles, and their work is the future work of that church is being built upon that work of the apostles and the prophets. So the Acts of the Apostles records only a few apostles' ministries. Most of the apostles' widespread ministries are known to us through Christian tradition and records written generations later. Some of the dates and stories are, of course, open to challenge and revision, but the essential historicity of their ministries, as shown in the previous maps, is certain. Do we have a passion for world evangelization as they did? Have we lost that apostolic vision to see the church move forth